and welcome to Banya Chat. My name's Thomas Barnes. I'm here with Wendy today. So, in the last few weeks, we've been speaking about the fostering assessment and the process in which we started off first with Heavens, where we spoke about the first inquiry, where we gathered some background information about you and your household and how many bedrooms you have and your phone number, just to get an idea of that you're interested in becoming a foster carer. We then followed it with the week after with Theo, where we spoke with the part one of the assessment, where we maybe paid a visit to your house to see who was in your house and whether you had the space. And we go through all the statutory checks, such as your DBS, medical, and local authority check. And then we followed that after with the following week with Rose, where we went to part two of the assessment, which was delving a bit deeper into yourself as a person, looking at how you're raised, your family tree, your history, and just talking about who you know and the people in your life, getting references about you and who you are as a person. And today we're following that up with one of the almost final parts of the assessment, which is going to panel. Wendy, could you give me an overview of what this is about, please?
Okay, so as you rightly said, the final step is completing that form, which is the end of stage two. Now, panel forms part of our final bits in quality assuring. The panel is an independent advisory board, and it's constituted of a chair and a vice chair and several panel members from different disciplines. You could, for example, you could have there a nurse, you could have there somebody from the teaching profession, you can have a care leaver, various different ex-service users from different disciplines. And you also have the medical advisor who forms part of it and the panel advisor as well. So it's a good mix of people that can range from 5 members to say even as many as 10.
Right. And what exactly are these members looking at?
Okay, all right. So what they do is they pick up this form, the final Form F report that's completed at the end of stage two. And what they do is they're given about, say, 7 days prior to the actual day of the meeting, which is the day where the actual panel day, which applicants can view as an interview. An interview, a final interview. So what they do is they read this report, and then they pull together a couple of questions and any other information that they would probably want to know a little bit more about when they interview our applicant.
Okay. So they've gathered all this information about you into the Form F, and then it's gone through the panel, and they go through it rigorously, checking, and then they invite you to panel. And what kind of things should you expect from them, or things should they expect from you?
Okay, what the applicant needs to think about is, say, for example, you're being interviewed for a job. So it's really part of interview preparation. So see that panel as your final interview. It usually takes approximately 10 to 15 minutes of an interview process. So what you need to do is to think about things like what your motivation is to foster, which is covered thoroughly throughout your assessment, your motivations, what are you there for, your function, what's the function of the carer? The carer is there to look after the young person, remembering about the importance of child-centeredness, the importance of looking after a child and a young person and what it involves, and just being ready, prepared really with all these type of questions that can be thrown at you.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. And what kind of outcomes can we expect from going to panel?
Okay, so what I'll throw you back a little bit. What we need to think about is the information that they're actually discussing during the panel. So our panel are sitting around this table and thinking about the areas for development, thinking about the strengths of this applicant, and then what they're doing is thinking about, okay, so if there are areas where they that needs developing, can these be covered through some form of training? So they'll think about things that the person needs to develop around their training needs. You know, if maybe they might need some training around, managing different types of children coming into care and that sort of thing. So those are the things that they need to be well prepared for. Now, thinking about your question, Tom, they need to. What could happen is that panels are really there to make a recommendation. So it's on isolated cases. Panels can make negative recommendations, but the majority of the cases they make positive recommendations. The reason being because they've just been through an 8-month assessment process, and this process is meant to be rigorous, meaning it's meant to be a very thoroughly thought through assessment. And the people that we have assigned, who are our social workers, have a responsibility to make sure that all the background checks have been done and they are fit to be foster carers. So what happens at the interview during that panel meeting is really the final touch. And it's not really a place where the panel members are now making a decision whether this person is suitable or not, but they are making recommendations, which are then obviously taken to another step further of the quality assurance process. So panels are there to make purely recommendations. And if you're an agency that, like Banya, that have done a very thorough and good assessment, then all these things that were maybe not clear should have been checked, should have been ironed out, and the applicant should never be in that situation where they may feel like they've been put on the spot and maybe they've been turned down. No, that's not the purpose of panels. It's really to endorse the assessments, and a good agency will make sure that obviously the assessments are well thought through, well done, and well put together.
So this panel is not exactly like a yes no thing. So it's more of a consultant type
That's
thing.
it.
So it's a
Yeah.
recommendation.
That's right. They almost act like independent, like consultants do, where they put recommendations in around the information that they've been given. So yes, they're not they're not making decisions, but they're making pure recommendations, which are then passed on to the agency.
So
Yeah.
who? So it would be the agency that make the final decision.
Yes, what we have is what we call the agency decision maker, and that's what we now then view as the post panel. So the panels have made their recommendations to approve most of the time, or maybe in isolated cases not to, but it's rare. Okay, but when it does, of course, these recommendations are taken further. Usually, it might be a couple of things that need to be carefully thought about again, but usually it shouldn't happen at that stage. And then the agency decision maker checks these recommendations and then decides, right, I am going to agree with whatever the panel have said, and I am actually going to approve this family as foster carers.
Mm. So
So, yeah.
my apologies. So we would go to the panel would make their recommendation, then it would go to the decision make the final decision maker at the agency, and they may choose to follow the panel's recommendations, or they may choose to not to.
Yes, again, in good practice, we make sure we've just been through an 8-month assessment, and the panel stage is really the final touch and is a quality assuring or quality check. So, as a good agency at Banya, we aim to do a thorough, rigorous assessment so that we never leave our applicants in that situation whereby they are let down after 8 months. If anything is unclear, usually at stage one, as you know, as you've seen in the last couple of videos, it's ironed out and it's dealt with then. So a lot of anything that may perhaps maybe stop the person from becoming a foster carer is dealt with at that stage. And the majority of it now, of course, is a more of an in-depth analysis that's dealt through obviously stage 2, which is what Rose was talking about last week. But the majority of the work is done. So it's a purely quality check. And of course, recommendations are made, but we've got to go with those recommendations, obviously, because we want to make sure that we are safeguarding and keeping Banya's interest, which is having the child as the center of our focus.
Mm. Of course, you want to get the best after the 8 months. You want to get the best outcome for um, the applicant and also for the child.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Another thing about panels is that they're not just limited to applicants. I know the last couple of weeks we've only spoken about the stage 1, stage 2, but panels also look at other types of reports. So it's not just the Form F that they're reading and obviously making recommendations on. We have after the first year, where a family has been approved as carers, they normally come back to panel and they're reviewed. So when carers are being reviewed, they are brought back to panel. And for various different reasons, it could be because it's their first year anniversary, or it could be for lots of different reasons. Maybe they've moved address and that sort of thing. So that's they're brought back to panel, and again, panel go through that quality check to make sure that the house that they've moved to is still suitable, and then they make their recommendations again, and then once again the family goes through the process of reapproval.
Right. Right. So basically, the panel is not just a singular time. There are maybe multiple visits to panel.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So throughout the carers' career time as foster, of fostering, they are brought to panel every now and again. What we try to do is usually in the first year is absolutely essential. That's part of, we're regulated for that. So, that's a must. It's a compulsory check that we need to do. And then thereafter, it could be odd reviews. So every sort of like maybe 3, 5, 7, so it's 10 odd years, we probably bring them back to find out how the family's doing, how they're getting along, if, where they are in their fostering, and then again, recommendations again for reapproval. So yeah, the panel has, it's not just a singular, but there's just multiple activities that they're involved in terms of making recommendations.
And so following panel saying I went through the assessment and I got to panel and I got approved. What would happen after that?
Okay, so once we've done been to the agency decision maker, and the agency decision maker has checked the minutes, because obviously these meetings have to be minuted. So they're checking the recording of the meeting, which is our minutes. They've looked at the reports at hand, and then they've made their decision. So what then happens that we need to make a verbal decision, and there are timelines where we need to actually do this process in line with the way we are regulated. So if it's a verbal sort of decision, what the ADM does, he informs the office, and then the office will give the carers or the family a phone call to say, well, congratulations, I'd like you to know that you are now approved as foster carers. And thereafter, some paperwork is sent out to them. So they will get a letter congratulating them to becoming approved foster carers, and then they get their contract, which is what we call the foster carer agreement, which they then need to read and sign off, and a couple of other things like a carer handbook, which has all the different policies and information that carers need in their journey as foster carers.
Mm.
Yeah.
You mentioned an ADM. May I ask what that is, please?
Okay. ADM stands for Agency Decision Maker.
Ah, okay.
And that's the individual from Banya who is now looking at what the recommendations that the panel have made. So panel make recommendations, and our agency decision maker makes the final decision. So it's the final endorsement, really. That's the end of our quality check in approving the foster carer. So he's really making that final decision. And then panel, again, just there to make recommendations, just like consultancy recommendations.
Ah, right. Sorry, I was a bit confused by the acronym.
That's right.
Yeah. So you said that that comes with a booklet and a package or some kind.
Yes,
Could
a
you go into
welcome
further
pack.
detail with that, please?
Of course, they'll have a couple of, so you've got the carer handbook, and that's got all the information they need about, the finances, the allowances, the money that they're being paid once they have children in their care, and how they allocate the finances that they've been given, the fees that they're being paid. It also talks about how to manage different things like allegations and how to deal with those. A lot of things that's involved obviously in the actual fostering process of the process of looking after a child. Another thing that we do as well at that stage is they then join a membership. So they join the fostering network as a member, and we do that as obviously part of the package of benefits of being a foster carer for Banya, and we take care of the expenses for that. And also notifying the local authority, their local authority, that they're now approved and registered foster carers. So their local authority is aware as well that they're foster carers.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, I've been monitoring the chat, and we've had quite a few questions that I think we should go through.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Lovely. Okay, so there are. So thank you for the questions. If you do have any, I will continue to ask them. Um, will I be able to see the final report before going to panel?
The answer is yes. What happens at the end of the stage two, which Rose spoke about last week, that report, before anyone sees it, it's given back to the family or the single applicant to read. So they have that opportunity to read and to agree with the information in the report, and then it's signed off at that stage. So nothing is presented at panel without the actual person who's spoken about, which is our applicant or prospective carer, and also the author has that responsibility to make sure that our applicant has read that report and that they agree and that you're all in agreement before it's signed off.
So you're just confirming that they've got all the correct information and double checking before it goes to
Exactly.
panel.
Exactly. Yeah.
They we discussed about the panel would give you recommendations. What kind of recommendations might these be?
Okay, normally recommendations that the panel make is the suitability to foster a child of a particular age group. So what happens, what you may note is that in the Form F, the author, who's the social worker, assessing social worker, has actually made an in-depth analysis on what that applicant is possibly capable of doing as a foster carer. So they would be making a recommendation around the sort of like age groups that they think they can manage. So it could be, say, for example, 5 to 18, it could be 11 to 18, it could be 0 to 18. It could also include parent and child if that applicant has maybe done access to the parent and child training, which they can do before they become foster carers, or of course that can happen later on. But all these things need to be explored. And then the recommendation is around the age group and obviously the fact that they can maybe look after all genders. We encourage, obviously, because we value diversity, we encourage applicants to be open in terms of acceptance of varying different age groups, different genders. That's all covered as part of the assessment. So a typical recommendation might read from this assessing social worker could say, I recommend that Ton be approved as a foster carer to foster a child of any gender, age group 0 to 18, which means you're then able to look after even a baby, for example, if they feel that you can manage that. And then you have to be comfortable with that yourself as well. So, yeah.
Would they also recommend things like training or support?
That would be, yes, that can be part of an action. We call those, yeah, we can recommend maybe, especially if it's parent and child. I mean, you don't get automatically recommended for mother and baby, parent and child. You do need to cover the training for that. So that would definitely involve some kind of training. And yes, training is always recommended depending on the areas for development that have been obviously brought up as part of the panel recommendations and considerations. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, Another question we have is, do I need to attend panel or my social worker can represent me?
Okay, it is very important that you attend. It's a bit like saying you've applied for a job and you're invited into to an interview, and then you say, "Oh, can I send somebody else to attend my interview on my behalf?" So it is encouraged, and yes, it is necessary to attend together with your social worker, assessing social worker. Yeah.
So you both have to attend.
Yes, both have to attend because what
Right.
happens at panel is sorry, I didn't mention this earlier, but the social worker is interviewed and then the applicant follows. That all happens on panel day as well.
Right. So
Yeah,
the social worker the social worker gets interviewed first to get their final opinions and on the applicant, and then the applicant goes in.
that's right. Yeah, in that order. In case there's any little bits and pieces that they need to tie up, then they have that discussion first with the assessing social worker, and then the applicant is invited thereafter.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. So another question is, what happens if I go through the interview process and then I have to stop the process? Can I then come back to it at a later date?
If they don't want to attend the panel, is that what they're saying? Or is that a postponing panel or stopping the process altogether? I'm not
I think
sure.
I
Mm.
think that's I think it's just putting it on pause
Ah,
for them to come back to it at a later date. Let's say they've gone through part assessments part 1 and 2, and they're just going to panel, but then something happens in their life, say a relative of passed, and they need some time um, to grieve, or such, or something happens in the family, and they can't go to panel just yet. Can they put the assessment on pause to come back to later?
okay. Yeah. If something has happened that has really influenced the continuation of the process, then yes, unfortunately, under those circumstances, we would have to put the family on hold. Now, it depends with the duration. If it's going to go on for, say, a year, we would have to bring them back as a as a reassessing, not really starting the process again, but we would have to obviously be sort of starting all over again, although technically we have the information there. I say that because what happens is we are regulated and there is an expectation that we complete the assessment and approve the family in a particular time frame. So, for example, if the person goes away for a year or two and comes back, then it wouldn't look right if it looks as though the assessment or the process has taken them 3 years. So we're literally restarting, and there's some checks. We have to obviously look at some of the checks. Sometimes, if it's say DBS, that is usually holds for at least 3 years, and they've sort of put fostering off for say 3 years, then obviously would have to redo those checks. But if it's say like 2 months, 3 months, or a couple of months, then obviously all the information we have is at hand, and then we would have to explain that gap, what actually happens. That would have to be explained, and that's would probably be produced in a separate small little report, which we call an addendum, and is presented to panel again that say, do you remember Tom, who wasn't able to, who had to put his fostering application on hold right at the end of the assessment? He's back now, he's ready after 3 months. So we would have to have a little document explaining that, so that whoever regulates us, who is, for example, Ofsted in this case, will have an understanding why it's taken so long.
Okay. So you can postpone it, but only but if it's postponed for too long, you have to go through the process again.
Yes, you do. But obviously, we
Yeah.
would review whether
But
we
it
need to
obviously,
redo the
because you've
checks.
been through the
Yeah.
process before, it would be a little bit quick. It'd be quicker.
Yes, it would, because most of the information will be there, and it depends with the validity, how long that break has been for.
Mm.
If it's a short break, then of course very little may have changed. But if it's, for example, unfortunate death in the family, then obviously there is an assessment process that now needs to take place around that loss in the family. So there'd be further, obviously, they'd have to assess a little bit further, and then bring the family back to panel again.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Another question is how long can I how long after panel can I expect to start fostering? So how long after panel will I expect to receive my first foster placement?
Okay, we are encouraged to complete the process from, say, panel until approval. That all needs to happen within 2 weeks, and that's our aim with the agency. We try to work as quickly as possible without wasting any further time. So by that time, the prospective carer would have had a letter to say they're now approved carers that have had their foster carer agreement, which is their contract, signed off, and also an introductory letter to say who their social worker is, their assigned supervising social worker will be. And then the supervising social worker goes in and begins another process, which will be discussed next week. So yeah, about 2 weeks, a window period between panel date and yeah, that they'd expect to be approved carers.
Interesting, interesting.
Yeah,
Another question is, can a ADM, so a agency
decision maker.
decision maker, um, override a panel decision?
That's a very good question. Yes, under within sort of reason, and obviously it has to be an isolated case, and it is usually an isolated case with Banya. We don't encourage it, and it's not encouraged either, because usually it doesn't really paint a good picture of the agency, because it means somewhere along the line something in during the assessment wasn't quite checked or thought through properly. That's what it makes, obviously, the situation looks like. So if, for example, the inspector sees an agency decision maker having made a decision that is maybe contradictory to what the panel is saying, they would question it, and they would want to understand exactly the reasons why, and they usually need to be very good reasons. So as long as we've got 8 months, so we've got to make sure the process is rigorous, it's absolutely thorough, and there's enough processes through the quality assurance, because you've got the supervision of the report, and then you've got the gatekeeper, another quality assurance, and then you've got panel. So throughout the assessment, and obviously stage 1 and stage 2, you've done your checks there at the end of stage 1 and moved it on to stage 2. So yeah, it's not encouraged, but it can happen. But on rare occasions, it can happen. Yeah.
So because it's a gathering of 5 to possibly 10, you say, professionals, this is obviously must gather in a certain area, in a certain location. So what happens, whereabouts are these locations? Are they specified in certain areas, and how accessible are these places to get to panel?
Okay, fantastic. Right. What we've done at Banya, because we are pretty much spread out nationwide, is we've got 3 locations. So we've got Milton Keynes area, we've got Birmingham, and we've got London. And we've got panels readily available in those 3 locations. Now, due to COVID, we've had to introduce virtual. So it's been panels have been pretty much virtual the last few months because of COVID-19. But otherwise, the normal process is to visit, say, the London office, where we have a suitable meeting room, and that's where we hold our panels, or Birmingham or Milton Keynes. And for a few of our families a little bit further out, obviously, as the agency grows, we will be introducing more locations that are more easily accessible. For example, Hampshire would be a good example, where eventually there'll be a local hub with their panel as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've got a lot of information there, very helpful. Um, I hope everyone's learned a thing or two about what it's like to go to panel and what happens after panel. So if you have any more questions, please ask them in chat. Next week, we will be talking to Julia about the supervising social workers. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much, Wendy.